Now, how do we link gender then with migration and climate change? Where does gender appear in this discourse? Climate change is first and foremost a human issue, where livelihood, security, and survival of communities are threatened. Human security is at stake when climate change impacts on food, health, water, and security of persons. Climate change impacts on everyone, but its adverse effects are disproportionately felt by the poorest and the most marginalized sectors. Vulnerability, which is used very often in the context of climate change, means the characteristic of persons or groups and their situation influencing their capacity to anticipate, cope with, resist, and recover from the impact of natural hazards. So your ability to adapt or to recover from any natural hazard will depend on your class position, on your ethnic position, on your gender position, and your general economic and social well-being. Now, gender is important to consider because it defines the socially constructed identities, roles, and responsibilities of women and men and their relationship to each other. Gender relations and identities are shaped by patriarchal institutions that embed male superiority over women in all socioeconomic, cultural, and political processes. Male superiority over women is manifested in the lack of ownership and systems, lack of ownership and access to entitlements, rights, and resources, as well as in decision making. Practices of social and political exclusion, for instance, render women more vulnerable to all forms of discrimination and exploitation, such as physical and sexual violence, and discrimination at all levels. So these are some of the manifestations of gender and equal relations. A lack of access to ownership over productive resources. Majority of women farmers, for instance, do not have secure land rights. Without land rights, women will not be able to secure livelihoods, access credit, or even have a measure of economic independence. Women's productive assets are generally of lesser value than that of men, and this limits their potential to increase their potential for production and increases their vulnerability, particularly in the face of shocks. Just imagine a woman who is not uneducated, illiterate, have no assets, no money, no employment, who suddenly becomes, widowed as a result of natural disasters. The other vulnerability also is the lack of access to employment and career advancements. Women often grow, process, manage, and market food and other natural resources, are responsible for raising livestock, but the productive work that they do is not valued, even in terms of our economic statistics. Customary laws often restrict women's property and land rights and make it difficult for them to engage in environmentally sustainable farming practices. So also the access to education, 2/3 of the world are illiterate, are women, and this reduces their possibility for gaining wage employment, which could be an important source of alternative income, particularly during disasters. And lastly, women do not have participation rights in farmers' organization, commercial networks, which all tend to be mediated by male relations. So even in the communities, women, of course, all international organizations now require women's participation, but very often the husbands would, restrict them or prevent them from attending such seminars because they do not believe that women have those kinds of entitlements. So what are some of the gender vulnerabilities in environmental disasters? Of course, we all know that casualties are higher for women than that of men. They're also vulnerable to sexual violence before, during, and after natural disasters. I don't know if you've heard a lot of, rapes during the Katrina tragedy and in the tsunami areas. These are occasions where women's vulnerability is heightened and that, their security of persons, even during emergencies and especially when they are in resettlement camps, where there is no privacy, no health care, no security. Women tend to be the targets of hooligans and targets of attack. Also, during these occasions, women's responsibilities in the domestic scene are often, increased burdens are also such that women themselves have no time to take care of themselves or their children. And higher levels of violence against women happen because of the sense of hopelessness and despair when their husbands or partners drink and turn on them and attack them. And most of all, the absence or lack of health and reproductive health services for women and children who experience, changes in their, or become pregnant, or are raped, or anything of that sort. So these are just some images of women who, even children, young children, who then have to take the burden of sustaining their family with or without any support system. Now, what are some of our gender-responsive strategies in disaster reduction? These are now practiced in many areas. For instance, in the Philippines, we use several approaches that are gender-sensitive. But at the center of the planning should be, at the core of the planning should be considerations of how differently women and men are affected. So put gender at the core of disaster reduction. Second of all, generate sex disaggregated data, which are not often, included in the planning. So we presume that everybody is affected in the same manner. Now, but as we all know, women have very different needs from men. So sex disaggregated is a must. The third is to identify and prioritize the most marginalized and at-risk groups: old women, disabled, minority and indigenous women, young children, and young women who are at the risk of sexual violence, as I mentioned. Engage women as full partners in planning, mitigation, and rehabilitation work. And utilize inclusive disaster management approaches such as people-oriented planning, which is now utilized in the Philippines, capabilities analysis, and social analysis that includes the participation of women. Next, please. I have here a small table that has been generated by many experiences in Asia, and this comes from the Asian Disaster Preparedness Center 204. The most effective starting point of any disaster or risk reduction strategies would have to be the community, because that's where the tragedies happen. And policy making in disaster management, as I mentioned, have to integrate women in the policy making process if it is to be inclusive and successful. Human resources have to include and increase women's knowledge and expertise on this, because often they are left out of such trainings. Data collection and assessment of gender disaggregated data. The organization of women to address needs during calamities. Institutionalized women's participation in emergency committees. I think in the Philippines now, the level of preparedness is much higher than it was about 10 years ago, because now the local governments are very conscious of anticipating